Hello everybody, it's Vertical Sandwich. Welcome back to book reviews. If you hear noises like sputtering noises, that's my coffee pot. One of the greatest mechanical troopers in the galaxy. That thing, 3 pots a day every day. It's ridiculous the amount of caffeine. I mean, it's just my blood, it's just caffeine. So anyway, that being said, book reviews. Book reviews. If you're watching book reviews, you should be like, yeah, caffeine. Yeah. If you're reading tons of books and looking online for what people think about books, then caffeine's probably not a stranger to you. Although that's a horrible overgeneralization, and maybe you never touched the stuff out of them. So anyway, today, this is what I promised you last week. Today, that's not even close to the camera. Okay. Boom. This goes by bookmark. Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. Heinlein won the Hugo Award 4 times. So I think he actually was nominated something like 8 times. Stranger in a Strange Land was nominated twice, which I think is kind of unfair. You can't really have it. You can't be nominated every year till you win. But yeah, so it must have been nominated in 61, not won in 1962. It won the Hugo Award. So yeah, and Heinlein, we've talked about Heinlein. Heinlein's kind of one of the transition from magazine figures where you can kind of tell that he worked in there, but he was kind of fun enough to play around, and that for Heinlein a lot of stuff is about politics. This one, not so much, more about religion, which is kind of fun. Now here's the thing, we haven't talked about Starship Troopers yet, I don't believe, and that's the 4th book. I read it, it's sitting on a shelf. I've started reviews for it several times, but I don't really know kind of how to jump into it, so we'll figure that out. But Stranger in a Strange Land was the last of the 4 Heinlein winners that I read, and I'm glad for that, because The Moon is a Harsh Mistress has some comedy to it and some satire, and what did we do? Double Star was very early, so. Starship Troopers is not very. Starship Troopers is very. I mean, it's his most controversial winner. Stranger in a Strange Land, though, is kind of the most brilliant kind of height of his satire and humor, and he does a really good job in this book. I really love this. I thought it was just. I mean, it's one of the 1960s winners, so we said, I really love the 60s list. So the story of Valentine Michael Smith, born and educated on Mars, who arrives on our planet superhuman in abilities and ignorant of sex as we know it, he shocks the mores of Western culture by attempting to set up a strange and fascinating discipline on Earth, the first step in learning to grok. Grok as G-R-O-K. It's not a word. It's used so much in this novel. So, yeah. The idea is the first colonists on Mars, their ship, they land, they all die. I think one of them is murdered, but one of them has a child, right? And the child survives. Indigenous Martians raise him, and then Earth, like the second explorers of Mars or whatever, discover him, bring him back to Earth, and he's got all this weird stuff going on, like all this crazy stuff. Like he's just superhuman. He's just superhuman. He's later in the book he can teleport. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. But he also he's kind of human. Yeah, and he doesn't understand anything about what we do, and he becomes this kind of media sensation, and then eventually he becomes the leader of our religion. So, yeah. So what I'm going to read is that the woman who is one of the primary main characters, meets him in the hospital. She's a nurse there. So we'll talk about that. We're going to read that. Jillian Boardman was a competent nurse, and her hobby was men. She went on duty that day as supervisor of the floor where Smith was. When the grapevine said that the patient in suite K12 had never seen a woman in his life, she did not believe it. She went to pay a call on the strange patient. She knew of the no female visitors rule, and while she did not consider herself to be a visitor, she sailed past without attempting to use the guarded doors. Marines had a stuffy habit of construing orders literally. Instead, she went into the adjacent watchroom. Dr. Thaddeus looked up. Well, if it ain't Dimples! Hi, honey, what brings you here? This is part of my rounds. What about your patient? Don't worry your head, honey child. He's not your responsibility. See your order book. I read it. I want to look at him. In one word, no. Oh, Tad, don't go regulation. He gazed at his nails. If I let you put your foot inside that door, I'd wind up in Antarctica. I wouldn't want Dr. Nelson even to catch you in this watch room. She stood up. Is Dr. Nelson likely to pop in? Not unless I send for him. He's sleeping off low-G fatigue. Then what's the idea of being so duty-struck? That's all, nurse. Very well, doctor, she added. Stinker. Jill, stuffed shirt too, he sighed. Still okay for Saturday night? She shrugged. I suppose. A girl can't be fussy these days. She went back to her station and picked up the pass key. She was balked, but not beaten, as Suite K-12 had a door joining it to the room beyond, a room used as a sitting room when the suite was occupied by a high official. The room was not then in use. She let herself into it. The guards paid no attention, unaware that they had been flanked. She hesitated at the door between the two rooms, feeling the excitement she used to feel when sneaking out of students' nurses' quarters. She unlocked it and looked in. The patient was in bed. He looked at her as the door offered a wrong reply. What is this? He looked at her as the door offered a wrong reply. That can't be right, is it? No, as the door opened, her first impression was that here was a patient too far gone to care. His lack of expression seemed to show the apathy of the desperately ill. Then she saw that his eyes were alive with interest. She wondered if his face was paralyzed. She assumed her professional manner. Well, how are we today? Feeling better? Smith translated the question. The inclusion of both of them in the query was confusing. He decided that it might symbolize a wish to cherish and grow close. The second part matched Nelson's speech forms. Yes, he answered. Good. Aside from his odd lack of expression, she saw nothing strange about him, and if women were unknown to him, he was managing to conceal it. Is there anything I can do? She noted that there was no glass on the bedside shelf. May I get you water? Smith spotted at once that this creature was different from the others. He compared what he was seeing with pictures Nelson had shown him on the trip from home to his place. Pictures intended to explain a puzzling configuration of this people group. This, then, was woman. He felt both oddly excited and disappointed. He suppressed both in order that he might grok deeply, with such success that Dr. Thaddeus noticed no change in the dials next door. But when he translated the last query, he felt such surge of emotion that he almost let his heartbeat increase. He caught it and chided himself for an undisciplined nestling. Then he checked his translation. No, he was mistaken. The woman creature had offered him water. It wished to grow closer. With great effort, scrambling for adequate meaning, he attempted to answer with due ceremoniousness. I thank you for water. May you always drink deep. Nurse Boardman looked startled. Why, how sweet. She found a glass, filled it, and handed it to him. He said, you drink. Wonder if he thinks I'm trying to poison him, she asked herself. But there was a compelling quality to his request. She took a sip, whereupon he took one also, after which he seemed content to sink back, as if he had accomplished something important. Jill told herself that, as an adventure, this was a fizzle. She said, well, if you don't need anything, I must get on with my work. She started for the door. He called out, no! She stopped. Eh? Don't go away. Well, I'll have to go pretty quickly, she came back. Is there anything you want? He looked her up and down. You are... woman? The question startled Jill Boardman. Her impulse was to answer flippantly, but Smith's grave face and oddly disturbing eyes checked her. She became aware emotionally that the impossible fact about this patient was true. He did not know what a woman was. She answered carefully. Yes, I am a woman. Smith continued to stare. Jill began to be embarrassed. To be looked at by a male she expected, but this was like being examined under a microscope. She stirred. Well, I look like a woman, don't I? Do not know, Smith answered slowly. How does woman look? What makes you woman? Well, for pity's sake! This conversation was further out of hand than any she had had with a male since her 12th birthday. You don't expect me to take off my clothes and show you. Smith took time to examine these symbols and try to translate them. The first group he could not grok at all. It might be one of those formal sounds these people used. Yet it had been spoken with force, as if it might be a last communication before withdrawal. Perhaps he had so deeply mistaken right conduct in dealing with a woman creature that it might be ready to discorporate. He did not want the woman to die at that moment, even though it was its right and possibly its obligation. The abrupt change from rapport of water ritual to a situation in which a newly won water brother might be considering withdrawal or discorporation would have thrown him into panic, had he not been consciously suppressing such disturbance. But he decided that if it died now, he must die at once also. He would not grok it any otherwise, not after giving of water. The second half contained symbols he had encountered before. He grokked imperfectly the intention, but there seemed to be a way to avoid this crisis by acceding to the suggested wish. Perhaps if the woman took its clothes off, neither of them need discorporate. He smiled happily. Please. Jill opened her mouth, closed it. She opened it again. I'll be darned. I'm not gonna read to tell you if Jill takes her clothes off. But so that's the way this is written. It's written from the point of view of this guy who's never experienced humanity, doesn't know what sex is, doesn't know what women are, shows up on planet Earth, and ends up getting kidnapped, I'll tell you that much, and shoved in the home of a crotchety writer, who I think has a lot of Heinlein in him. And the writer character is delightful. He is absolutely totally delightful in this book. But you can kind of tell where, like, the writer is obviously meant to be this kind of cynical humanist, and you could tell that he, towards the end of the book, he kind of starts being won over. There's really kind of a struggle for this guy's soul, I'll go with, I guess, in the book. But beyond that, there's an incredible cynicism about humanity and about organized religion, and then kind of this character looking at everything from the outside. I mean, we know Heinlein's a legend in science fiction for various reasons. We know Heinlein has won more Hugo Awards, as many Hugo Awards as anybody else, and he's been nominated more than anybody else. And we know that Heinlein was incredibly influential, or maybe we don't know that, but it's true. It's true. He's one of those names. He's just one of those names in science fiction that you meet the name before you meet the work. Like you've probably heard of Heinlein novels before you ever read a Heinlein novel. So that being said, this is one of the better ones I've read. I mean, I've only read 4, but out of the 4, this is the one I liked the most. It definitely was. It's all the things science fiction writers have tried to do this type of thing before. And there's actually some jokes in Spin. I just read Spin, and there are some jokes about Stranger in a Strange Land, because there's a guy from Mars in there, and they were making jokes about this book, which I think is fantastic. And like, so, A Case of Conscience by Blish tries to do a similar thing to this, but in my opinion, not as well. There's a lot of kind of stuff about, when humans interact with aliens, how strange that will be, and how bizarre it is, and Heinlein kind of takes it and flips it on its head anyway, and says, like, what if a human is raised by aliens and becomes fundamentally, culturally an alien, but with the body of a human, and then is reintroduced to Earth? And that being said, so then what results is this kind of, there's these attempts people want him to endorse products, religions want him as like a member, and kind of what has happened to like the most popular form of Christianity in this story is just amazing. There are slot machines in the lobby, and there are like products that are endorsed by the church that the members have to buy and stuff, and you just go, man, there's a real echo for kind of, I mean, like, it's not hard to forecast, 40 years into the future of your society in some ways, right? And the idea that some variations of Christianity would become purely about money, it wasn't a hard thing to probably see in the 60s. But man, I mean, you look at the prosperity gospel and you just go, yeah, Heinlein, yeah. And the cover of this book just came off. It just came off. The cover, it's gone. It's gone. The book no longer has a cover. See? Look. Look. Now I'll have to tape it, which I'll have to tape. But that being said, I loved this book. This book ages perfectly. There's almost no kind of overreaching technology that makes you think, man, they really guessed wrong. Like, it's pretty standard stuff. Most of it takes place on Earth. All the military technology is just military technology. Nothing super bizarre, except the idea of kind of human minds being capable of things like teleportation and telepathy and and telekinesis. Those kind of things that we now largely consider pseudoscience, but which in the 60s and kind of earlier, those things could kind of be staples of science fiction, and not so much anymore. Although maybe sometimes I suppose you could argue that in a way the Broken Earth series is kind of about that, but that's a fantasy slash science fiction. It's more fantasy than just science fiction. Which led to, in my opinion, very famously, Arthur C. Clarke apologizing for Childhood's End, which is crazy if you pick up a copy of Childhood's End, and the preface is an apology from Arthur C. Clarke for lending credence to the paranormal. And you're like, wow, that's crazy. But it's true. It's absolutely true. So I loved Stranger in a Strange Land. I think it is deserving of kind of the legendary status it has among science fiction novels. It earned its Hugo Award. It's a great addition to the 60s list, which I believe is at this point I'm starting to think is maybe the most legendary book of readable science fiction, or most legendary list of readable science fiction. I think you can't go wrong reading the Hugo Award winners from the 60s. I think they're all amazing. So that being said, next week we will be doing a book I didn't like. So I will see you for that. A Hugo Award winner I didn't like, of all things. And I will see you for that. Bye, everybody.